So, in the year 1307, we're jumping ahead now, remember the last Crusader citadel fell in 1291, so this is after 20 years or so after the fall of the last Crusader outpost in the Holy Land. 1307, King Philip IV of France ordered the arrest of all the Templar Knights within his country, within France. And he had them arrested, interrogated, tortured, and numerous of them executed eventually. And they were based on charges that Philip laid against them, charges of heresy, charges of blasphemy, charges of sodomy. He said that was all prevalent in the order. It was institutionalized in the order. Now, the Da Vinci Code states that it was Pope Clement who destroyed the Templars because of their alleged worship of a horned fertility god known as Baphomet and their adherence to Gnostic and occultist heresies. In a dramatic finale there, Brown suggests that the Pope was present when the Templars were burnt in Rome, and he had their ashes scattered in the Tiber. So when the Templars were executed, they were executed in Paris, and the Pope wasn't there. He was actually in Avignon. So there was no, that's all imagination, right? So it's the charges that Philip brought against the Temple Knights were not the real reason why he went after them, of course. He was motivated by a desire to possess the vast wealth the Templars acquired in the decades following their foundation, and as a way to remove a military presence from France. So those are the two main motivations of Philip. What he had here was a large military presence in France, and these soldiers were a threat in some ways. They answered to the Pope and not to him. They were completely outside his jurisdiction, and he didn't like that. Because as we were saying this morning, there was always that rivalry between the local monarch and the Pope, and so this was here, he saw this as a threat. But even more important than that, he wanted their wealth. And the Kingdom of France was bankrupt. He had tried everything he could to taxation, everything he could to try to make up for this, but he couldn't. So he was basically bankrupt. And he saw the Templar wealth, and we're going to see why now, but they had a vast, vast wealth. He thought he could lay his hands on that, and then that would do the trick. That would help him out of his financial problems. He managed to achieve this, as we're going to see, due to his manipulation of the Pope. He managed to get the Pope under his power for a while, and that's how he managed to get this done. So the Templars were criticized. There were some general criticisms against them during the period, beginning around the year 1200. There starts to be increasing criticism of the Templars. Why? Because they began to get wealthy. They began to acquire vast lands. People were leaving lands to them. This was very common, by the way. It is estimated that by the time of the Reformation, the Church owned, in one way or another, between a quarter and a third of all the land in Europe. And how did that happen? It happened mainly because, you'd have a count, so-and-so, who had vast lands. Maybe he didn't have any children, and he'd spent his life, burning monasteries and, doing terrible things. And on his deathbed, he realized he's going to be judged. These people had faith, even though they didn't live lives of faith. So what do? Well, in your will, you give all your lands to the church. And so, and once the church had lands, it couldn't lose them. And a family could die out. It would happen that someone would not have children, and so it would be forfeited to the crown, or you would have to give it to someone else. That never happened with the church, of course. The church had a continuity there. So once the church got land, in one way or another, to a monastery or to a diocese, they would give it to the bishop of the diocese, not as a personal thing, but as bishop, to the office of the diocese. This kind of thing, there was between a quarter and a third of the land. So the Templars had vast lands, many castles that were being given to them over the years. They were allowed to keep the wealth that they captured from the Muslims, which was not infrequent, They would, in their counterattacks, they would attack Muslim caravans, and they would obtain wealth that way. They were free from all taxation of the crown, another reason why Philip wanted to get his hands on their lands. They were able to tax people who were on their land, of course. So they had these vast lands, people would work these lands, so the serfs would work them, and they would then get the produce from that, or a percentage of it, or they would be able to tax clergy who were on their lands and ministering. So by the year 1260, it's calculated that there were 20,000 people who had some sort of affiliation with the Knights Templar. There were probably around 1,000 knights altogether, because to become a Knight Templar, you had to be a knight by birth. You had to be someone who was of a knightly status, and there weren't that many of those. So possibly 1,000 knights, and a great number of what are called sergeant-at-arms, which are people who are also fighting people who were mounted, who were in full military gear, but who did not have the status of knights. And then you went down. There were people who were on foot, but who would fight as well, people who were servants, and the people who were helping out and sort of thing, the priests. So there were 20,000 people who had some sort of affiliation to the Templars. The Templars also began a wealthy banking network, where the nobility who were going on crusades, beginning, so-and-so is going on a crusade, Count so-and-so, what he does is he leaves his money in his valuables in the hands of the Templars. It's like a bank. And when he gets to the Holy Land, if he wants money, then he can ask the Templars there, and they will give him money there. So it's like a banking system. And they were the ones who set it up for the Holy Land. So that started like that. In the end, they became bankers, pure and simple. So people would deposit money with them, they would keep it, and they would invest it, and then they would give it back when the person needed it. But of course, when the person died, they would often leave it to them in their will if they didn't have any heirs themselves. So they grew rich, basically. They were also charging fees, of course. If someone left money with them in Europe, and he wanted his money in the Holy Land, they would charge a fee for that. So they were obtaining both in that way. So then they began to lend money to kings and to nobles for crusading expeditions at the beginning, and then for other reasons at the end. So they were owed a lot of money, and Philip owed a lot of money to the Templars at the time that he destroyed them. So that was another reason why it was expedient for him to do them in. So the Templar headquarters in Paris became the banking center for all the French kings, including Philip at the end. So all of that led to criticisms. There are two things: their privileged status and their banking operations, and also they were accused of being morally lax, of losing their fervor of their first founding. And that's not unusual. It happens with most religious orders. If we look at the history of the church, it's a period where a religious order is founded. For the first 100, 200 years, everything goes very well, but little by little it goes down, and then a reformer comes, and he instills back into the religious order the spirit of their founder, and then for another period of time it goes up. It's sort of human nature. That, unfortunately, over a period of time, religious orders, not always, but in many cases, they tend to become lax, and then they are reformed, and they take on a new life. So this was happening with the Templars. They were becoming lax in their vocations, they were becoming lazy in their military training, they were becoming attached to a luxurious lifestyle, something that went completely against their rule. At times they were refusing to aid crusading armies in combat against the Muslims, which they shouldn't have done. They would put conditions that were unacceptable. Some of you may have seen this movie, Kingdom of Heaven, with the Crusades. Yeah, it's not accurate in many details, but in the general thing it's true. But I think it paints the Templars much worse than they actually were. They're the real villains in that movie.